It's weird when you talk about the Baltimore Ravens because there's no question they're one of the premier franchises in the National Football League. There's no question. From a competitiveness standpoint, being in a position to contend over the past 2 decades, a relevance, record, like success in general. They've got 2 Super Bowl trophies. It can go on and on. There's no question. They're one of the real class organizations in the NFL. So you can almost feel bad criticizing them sometimes. Because you sit there and say, man, my team isn't like that. I wish they could hold up to that standard. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's great to consistently win or consistently be in the mix. But at some point in time, that shit gets kind of old too. Where you make the playoffs, it seems like almost every year, and then never get it done, never win the big one. You know, we're coming up on almost a decade since the Ravens won their last Super Bowl. And you really look at this organization and you say they transitioned from Joe Flacco, who was at least a solid NFL starting quarterback for over a decade, to Lamar Jackson, who's had an interesting 3 years, including last year, 2019 season, being the league's most valuable player. So you're talking about a team that's had stability at the most important position to at least some degree. They've had pretty good defenses for the most part over the years. And yet, they don't have but 2 Super Bowl trophies to show for it. Really weird. But you look at them, again this year, it's kind of a similar pattern. You probably weren't expecting Lamar to come out and have another follow-up to what he had last year. You weren't expecting another MVP type of year, but you know, this team got off to a 5-1 start. You're thinking, okay, you know, they're pulling together after that disappointing loss in the playoffs at home in the divisional round to the Titans where they got upset. Lamar and that offense looked really bad, etc. But you're saying, okay, they're in a good spot. But then they come out of the bye and they lose 4 of their next 5. So you're sitting there talking about a Ravens team that the season before had the best record in the AFC, had home field advantage throughout. Now you're coming into 2020 and through 10 games they're 5-5 and not looking good and looking like a bit of a hot mess. And 6-5, whatever the fuck. And they had to win their last 5 games basically to get in, and they did. Now, I'll be damned. Like, when they were sitting there at 6-5, I thought there's no way this Ravens team makes the playoffs. Like, reality's come crashing down on them a little bit, and I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. They won their last 5 games. They made the playoffs, finished 11-5. Like, it's kind of a tough deal when you have to win 11 games just to make the playoffs. And then I thought it was impressive how they went to Tennessee and they avenged last year's upset loss. Like, those are the types of games against those types of teams where you face off against them and they beat you in that type of manner, and they could have kind of a mental hold over you. And they could have this feeling of dominance over you and this feeling of ultimate confidence that when the chips are down, when shit gets to get, that they're going to be able to get you and you going to get got. But the Ravens handled their business against Tennessee, avenged last year's playoff loss. So you're looking at them and saying, okay, now you got to go on the road to Buffalo. You know, the Ravens can run the ball. They can play high-level defense. They got a chance. And then the offense in Lamar got completely, totally shut down, and Buffalo ended up beating them 17-3 in that divisional round game. And frankly, the game didn't even feel that close. 14-point victory margin, and it felt like it was a whole hell of a lot worse. And I think now you're in this weird space when you're the Baltimore Ravens, like, where do you go from here? How do you avoid backsliding, but how do you actually get to where you can take that next step and truly be among the contenders? Because offensively, you're the best rushing team in the league. Lamar had another 1,000-yard rushing season from the quarterback position. Think about that. Back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons as a quarterback is truly something we've never seen before. And J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards really took over the reins from Mark Ingram. They put him on the back burner. When you throw those guys into the mix along with Lamar, like, this is a team that can run the ball consistently. But there's also the problem that the challenges remain in the passing game. Lamar had less than 3,000 yards passing. And when your starting quarterback is starting pretty much every game of the season, in today's NFL, if he can't even break 3,000 yards passing, there's a problem. The quarterback is certainly a part of it. He is not entirely or exclusively the problem. But let's be clear, that is pathetic. To have a quarterback in today's game start your whole season and not be able to throw for 3,000 yards. It's also reflected in just the lack of, threats that they had on the outside. You had no receivers go over 800 yards receiving. Right? So the offensive challenges remain. They were there last year in the divisional round against Tennessee, and they were obvious. If you could take away the run, the Ravens were sunk. This year, when you talk about the Bills, they were able to take away Lamar in the passing game, and they were sunk. They didn't have a chance. Because you look at this defense and you say, okay, they might be championship level, and in some ways they certainly are. They're top 10 in the league overall in total yards allowed the second fewest points in the league. Like, it's got to be frustrating if you're a Ravens fan, and a little head-scratching if you're the Ravens organization. You're saying the traditional model of play great defense and really be able to run the ball should be good enough. And if this was the league of even 10, 15, 20 years ago, we might see the Ravens with yet another Super Bowl trophy. But the problem is it's not that league anymore. And you have to have big explosive plays on offense. You have to be able to score in all types of situations, circumstances, environments, and all different types of methods and ways. So you can sit there and continue to invest in a defense that plays at a high level, but it's not making a difference for you. Ray Lewis ain't walking through that door after hiding his bloody suit and threatening to kill people. Ed Reed's not being the man that he was. He ain't walking through that door. Haloti Ngata's not walking through that door. And even if they were, that probably still isn't good enough to help this team win a Super Bowl. You've got to get out of this mindset of defense first in today's National Football League. The Ravens are by far from the only team that has this problem, but it is a problem. It is a significant, sizable problem, and it's the problem that keeps them from doing better and doing more. And you look at it, I always am fascinated with the Ravens every year. It feels really weird to me that this team is always up against it seems like, in terms of the salary cap, but they never keep anybody, is what it feels like. It's not entirely true, but this is always really weird. And, you sit there and you look at the continual cycle of a guy like Matt Judon. You take him in the middle rounds, you keep him for a few years, and then he finally develops. And then as he develops, becomes a free agent, you probably let him walk so that way you can get a future comp pick. But they've got to remake this team a little bit. And you could say it starts with Lamar. In some ways, yes. I will say this, is that he's had his inconsistencies as a passer. He's had his struggles as a passer. But he's also had some really good moments as a passer. He's had some really good games as a passer. And let's be clear, his number one weapon in the passing game is his tight end. You're going to say Hollywood Brown, and I'm going to say Mark Andrews, and I'm right. His best, most reliable, most consistent weapon in the passing game is Mark Andrews. The point I'm getting at here is, unless you're the hardest of hardcore fans, if I asked you to name the big playmakers in that Ravens offense, you go Lamar Jackson and you go, oh. That's the problem. They have to invest on the offensive side of the ball this offseason. Draft, what have you. And I know for them, they traditionally just kind of let the draft play out as it does, and then guys fall to them like Patrick Queen did last year. But this year, it might mean that you got to get a little aggressive, and you need to get some impact players and some difference makers. You certainly need another threat at wide receiver. You don't have enough. If you think Hollywood Brown and guys like Miles Boykin are going to be enough to get the job done, you are sadly mistaken. And if you think that, well, if you just replace Lamar Jackson, that would fix all the problems, no, it wouldn't. And then you wouldn't be able to run the ball as effectively. And then what the hell do you really have? You're at this spot now where you got to start thinking about long-term. You got to start thinking about what you're going to do in the future in terms of Lamar Jackson and his contract situation. Now he's 3 years in. This guy's been a league MVP. He's going to want to get paid. And it's going to be incredibly piss-poor optics if at some point in time you don't pay him. And it may not happen this offseason. It may happen next offseason or the one after that. But if you want to really be sure, if you're the Ravens, in your investment and future investment potentially in Lamar Jackson, then you have to figure out how to figure out the wide receiver position. You need skill players. You need game breakers. You need more speed, athleticism, just athletic pop. You could certainly use, some help, I think, on the interior of that offensive line. But it comes down to the skill players, man. They need speed and they need skill. They need guys that can make a difference. Because in that passing game right now, they just don't have them. And you could only get but so much out of Lamar if you're not going to better help him and better surround him with more talent. That's the reality. Now, the Ravens could sit there and, pivot their philosophy as an organization and potentially make a Super Bowl next year. Or they can dig in and keep their team with the same type of basic construction that it is, and as a result, be the same team they are right now again next year. Which one would you rather do? If I've got a guy that just won the MVP of the league at the quarterback position, by God, I would sure do everything in my damn power to surround him with more offensive weapons, even if that meant slightly the detriment of my defense and my investment on that side of the ball, because that's where championships are won in today's NFL, period.